Okay, so, um, hello everyone, and welcome to The Ancients Were Gay. I now present to you your host, Rotty. Take it away
Yeah,
whenever you're ready.
your host and your ho for all the BL stuff there is. Hello, and welcome. I hope you are having fun. Yeah, well, be sure, it's good that you almost had your drink. Be sure to drink as much as you can. Even I'm having water right now. Hello. Good evening, and thank you for joining me. Today we are going to explore a topic of same-sex relationship between men in the most popular ancient cultures. The presentation will be a mixture of basic historical facts and famous myths depicting homoerotic themes and examples of their reinterpretation or usage within media, not only BL, some of them BL, some of them not. I hope you will be having fun. Now tell me please, are the slides changing? Last year they didn't. Okay, yes, great, thank you. So, as many of you probably know, since we are all sitting here as one big family within this BL or gay fandom, the presence of same-sex desire and gender fluidity in myths is widespread across world cultures, like everywhere. These cultures told stories full of same-sex affection, erotic symbolism, and gender transformation, and these stories have become important sources for understanding the long global history of queer experience. Researchers on sexual identities and gender analyze both texts that vividly depict such relationships and those that focus on suspiciously intense emotional bonds, which, when you think about it, sometimes are so ridiculously gay they feel like a fan service. Such texts depict androgyny or erotic metaphors. However, even though they are seen gay now, they were not necessarily named or perceived the same way then. Queerness, as we understand nowadays in the context of ancient cultures, is relatively new. Modern scholars emphasize that these myths often reflect cosmic principles, social anxieties, or ritual functions, not personal identity, though that doesn't make them any less queer. Tonight, I would like to take you on a journey through different stories from Mesopotamia, Greece, Egypt, China, and Japan. And after a quick overview of what is known about social norms in regards to each civilization, I will turn into sort of a tribe, sharing with you the most iconic myths and legends. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer your questions along the way during the presentation, so I'll try to be quick as possible to finish everything on time so we can do a small Q&A at the end, or a conversation. Unless we won't be able to, then I will create the conversation space on the Discord channel. But nevertheless, yes, let's jump right into the first one, the Mesopotamian, one of the world's earliest civilizations, spanned from roughly 3500 BC to 539 BC, flourishing between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, as many of you may know. And homosexual behavior, from what we have gathered, from what we know, from all that is left of this civilization, it turns out that it was known but relatively uncommon, apparently. The evidence is fragmentary, though, and interpretations depend heavily on the context. Additionally, sources say almost nothing about relationships between women. I think that's quite an interesting fact. What can be understood from the available text is that homosexuality was not treated as a stable identity, but as an act with specific social meaning. Mesopotamian law codes mention male-to-male sex primarily in terms of status and humiliation. The issue was not the gender of the partner, but whether a free man was placed in a passive or so-called subordinate role. So that just shows how sexuality was quite political. The key distinction was between active and passive role. the active expressing dominance was fine, but the passive role, when free men decided to be one, was considered dishonorable. So you could say that they were not they were not against homosexuality, but they were against men receiving the act of homosexuality, if you can call it that. But what is interesting is also a religious context. Some men who decided to take on passive role voluntarily were called, curses, and sometimes enemies wished them to become. Oh, when somebody was someone's enemy, they sometimes were wished to become a male temple prostitute, because there was actually a cult of a goddess Ishtar, or Inanna, associated with sexuality and gender. And apparently there were men who, like a temple personnel, who performed ritualized sexual roles, of course, including passive roles, which is why these men held lower social status. And when it comes to the law itself, according to at least what we have left, including the Code of Hammurabi, the texts do not explicitly prohibit homosexual acts, but they regulate behaviors that violate honor, family, and social hierarchy. And now, on to the most famous story that could be considered as one of our interests is, of course, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Yes, exactly. Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk, ruled with brilliance but crushing arrogance. His people, worn down by his tyranny, begged the gods for relief. In answer, the gods shaped Enkidu from clay, a wild, powerful being meant to stand as Gilgamesh's equal. Enkidu lived freely among animals until the priestess introduced him to human life. Through her guidance, he learned speech, food, drink, and the meaning of community. When he tried to return to the wild, the animals fled. He understood then he had become human. Hearing of Gilgamesh's cruelty, Enkidu traveled to Uruk to stop him. Their clash shook the city, but neither could defeat the other. Respect replaced anger, and the two became inseparable friends. Seeking glory, Gilgamesh convinced Enkidu to join him in slaying Humbaba, guardian of the Cedar forest. Though afraid, Enkidu followed. Together they killed the monster, earning fame, and the gods' displeasure too. When Gilgamesh rejected the goddess Ishtar, she sent the bull of heaven, which the friends also defeated. This final defiance sealed their fate. One of them had to die. The gods chose Enkidu. His long, painful illness broke Gilgamesh's heart. When Enkidu died, the king wandered in grief, suddenly aware of his own mortality. Enkidu had humanized him. Gilgamesh had given Enkidu purpose. Their bond transformed them both. Yes, I can see that some people are using quotes, respect and friends. That's exactly what I was talking about when I meant the suspiciously impactful bonds between the characters of mythology. That's exactly what often is visible in the ancient texts. And probably the most famous, if not the only one, people know, representation of Enkidu and Gilgamesh is the one from the Fate series, from the games, and from the anime adaptation too. Actually, when you think about it, when you look at it, it's fairly similar. Enkidu in Fate is a divine construct without any specific gender. He's not human. His purpose is to stop Gilgamesh, whose arrogance is growing, and Gilgamesh fights him for a long time, considers him equal, they become friends, and then there is this problem with gods. Enkidu, spoiler alert, dies, and Gilgamesh cries, wails, and is very, very angry and devastated. Their bond feels intimate, even though it's not explicitly romantic, or at least not explicitly called romantic by the creators. And someone could actually say that this kind of interpretation was exactly the same as the one of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The creators actually leave the the interpretation to people who watch it allow us to explore it as friendship, soul bond, or romance. And now, Egypt, the next civilization. Egyptian mythology contains fewer explicit same-sex stories, but a lot of incest ones, definitely. And including something that we all know, but we will go to it in a second. What can be understood from yes, the lettuce, exactly. What can be understood from collected sources, Egyptian sexuality was understood through lens of order and disorder. What mattered was whether an act upheld social harmony, lineage, and hierarchy. Sexuality was a creative force tied to fertility, a social act connected to status, not a marker of personal identity. Modern Egyptologists emphasize that same-sex relationships certainly existed, but they were not recorded as a separate category of identity. They do appear, though, in affectionate thumb scenes, in literary metaphors, and some mythological narratives. The most famous archaeological case is the joint thumb of two high officials buried together in a pose typical for married couples of nose touching. Their depiction has led some scholars to interpret them as lovers, though obviously others argued they were brothers or close companions. Like in many ancient cultures, Egypt judged sexual acts through power of dynamic, not gender. A dominant partner was like someone who could retain their status, but a submissive partner risked losing one. Very similarly to the other ancient cultures in the Mediterranean Sea. And I guess we can move on to the with that we can move on to the example I've prepared for today, the relationship between Set and Horus in the famous mythological story. Same-sex desire appears in the myth and art literature, but it usually emphasizes how fertility, lineage, and family are important in the Egyptian culture, and it is visible kind of over here as well. The tale of Osiris, Seth, and Horus. Osiris once ruled Egypt with wisdom, teaching people how to live in harmony, while Isis, his wife, protected the land with her powerful magic. But Osiris's brother, Seth, god of storms and desert, chaos, grew jealous of the flourishing kingdom. He trapped Osiris in a beautifully crafted chest and cast it into the Nile, plunging Egypt into grief. Isis searched until she recovered Osiris's body, but Seth destroyed it again, scattering the pieces across the land. Isis gathered them and used her magic to restore Osiris long enough to conceive a son, Horus. Osiris, no longer able to live among the living, descended to the underworld and became its eternal ruler. Horus grew up hidden and protected until he was strong enough to challenge Seth for the throne. Their conflict became a long cosmic struggle, fought in battles in animal forms and before the divine court. In one episode from the contendings of Horus and Seth, Seth attempted to assert dominance over Horus in a symbolic, non-graphic sexual act meant to prove Horus unfit to rule. In the myth, Seth attempts to sexually overpower Horus. The act is not described graphically, but the meaning is quite explicit. Seth wants to show that Horus is weak and unfit to rule. In ancient Egyptian symbolism, penetration equals dominance and victory, while being penetrated equals subordination, defeat. So Seth's goal is to disqualify Horus in front of the divine tribunal. However, Horus and Isis outsmart Seth. Horus catches Seth's semen in his hands and throws it into the river. Isis then places Horus's semen on Seth's favorite food, the lettuce, and when the gods later test whose semen is inside whom, Seth is revealed to be the one impregnated, quote unquote, symbolically proving that Horus has dominated Seth, not the other way around. And this reversal humiliates Seth and strengthens Horus' claim to the throne. This clever victory strengthened Horus's claim, setting the stage for his eventual triumph and the restoration of rightful order in Egypt. Seth was cast to the desert and Osiris, watching from the underworld, knew that his son had reclaimed the balance of the world. Sure, all of you are already aware which example I'm going to use, or I was going to use. Yes, of course, this famous manhwa from that you can read on Lizine. I could not stop myself from putting this meme over here because that's just the perfect description of how the author decided to reinterpret the whole story. So Osiris in the original myth is the good guy, like the ultimate good guy, but the author of Enid decided to make him the bad guy. He falls in obsessive love with his brother Seth, and he wants to possess him completely. And everything that goes wrong within the story, everything that goes wrong with Horus and Seth's life, is because of this guy. He, throughout the whole comic, tries to get Seth within his hands. He wants to possess him when they are in the same realm, and then he tries to take him to the underworld realm, which he cannot leave. And I think it's a very, very clever idea. I love the author for even deciding to use it. And honestly speaking, if you guys miraculously have never seen or heard about this comic, I definitely recommend checking it out. Now that you know the original myth, you can compare it to the story itself, where Seth is basically like this one character everyone falls in love with or wants to have sex with. The title of this comic is Enid, I think that's what it's called. That's what it's read. And now, the next example, the culture of ancient Greece. I think it has been noted that Greek literature and philosophy celebrated male-to-male love as a source of intellectual inspiration, moral development, and philosophical insight. And probably one of the cultures that have the best described social structure of homosexuality, if you can call it that. Greek sexuality operated within a system of honor, hierarchy, and civic identity as well. What mattered was role, age, and citizen status that you have, and not, technically speaking, sexuality that we understand now. The most culturally visible form of same-sex relationship was pederasty, a structured bond between an adult man and an adolescent youth from 12 to 17 years old. This was especially common among aristocratic circles and often tied to, of course, mentorship and education, military training, as well as some kind of emotional erotic attachment. Some city-states accepted it openly, while others were more restrictive. But it was socially accepted and often idealized in art, poetry, and philosophy. However, expected to end when the youth reached adulthood. The key expectation was that the youth would eventually become an adult citizen and then take the active role, not passive. So you could say that adult male relationships, scholars have noticed that they did exist, they were socially more complicated. Greek norms valued masculinity and self-control. So again, that active partner maintained honor, but that passive partner risking being seen as effeminate, so socially inferior. And there were also men called kinainos, men who willingly took a passive role as an adult, were labeled as kinainos, and they were seen as shameful. The Greek society drew a sharp line between respected homoerotic bonds and behaviors seen as shameful, and kinaidos were seen as the latter. Masculinity was defined by dominance and self-control, so being passive in a relationship was socially inferior. However, the Greek law did not criminalize same-sex acts in general, but punished behaviors that violated citizen dignity, you could say. So if an adult male citizen allowed himself to be penetrated, could lose political rights, okay? Prostituting oneself was not very nice, okay? And what is interesting is that sexual relations with freeborn boys could be seen as inappropriate. Freeborn boys were basically boys born to citizen parents who were not slaves, who were not foreigners, who were not illegitimate. They were legally recognized as future citizens that could vote, that could take part in the social life, and they were not adults yet. Of course, we are talking about the boys. On to the mythology. The first one, Apollo and Hyacinthus. Hyacinthus was a young prince of Sparta, so beautiful that even the gods paused to look at him. One spring morning, as he walked across the garden hills, Apollo saw him and felt his heart stir. The god of light descended not with thunder or force, but with warmth, drawn to the boy's grace and spirit. From that day on, they were rarely apart. Apollo taught Hyacinthus to play the lyre until the strings sank like sunlight, to shoot an arrow straight as a ray of dawn, and to run swifter than the wind across the fields. They hunted together, traveled together, and shared long days filled with laughter and quiet companionship. In all the world, there were few mortals Apollo loved as deeply. But the west wind, Zephyrus, watched them with growing jealousy. He, too, had admired Hyacinthus, and seeing the youth choose Apollo over him, darkened his gentle breezes into envy. One bright afternoon, Apollo and Hyacinthus began a friendly game of discus. Apollo cast the disc high into the sky, and Hyacinthus ran forward to catch it as it fell. In that moment, Zephyrus sent a sudden violent gust of wind. The discus swerved, struck Hyacinthus, and he collapsed into Apollo's arms. Apollo tried desperately to save him, but even the god of healing could not call him back. Grief overcame him. He would not let the boy's spirit fade into the underworld, nor allow his beauty to be lost to time. Kneeling beside him, Apollo transformed Hyacinthus' spilled blood into a flower, deep purple, delicate, and marked with the mournful cry. Thus, the Hyacinth was born, a living memory of the youth he loved. And in Sparta, Apollo established the Hyacinthiia, a festival, so that Hyacinthus' name would be spoken for generations. Zeus and Ganymede. Ganymede was a young prince of Troy, famed everywhere for his beauty. He tended his father's flocks on the quiet slopes of Mount Ida, where the wind moved swiftly through the grass and the world felt peaceful. One day, Zeus looked down from Olympus and saw the boy walking among the sheep. Struck by his grace, the god took the form of a great eagle and swept down from the sky. Before Ganymede could react, the eagle lifted him gently and carried him upward through the clouds. When they reached Olympus, Zeus revealed himself and welcomed the boy with kindness. He offered Ganymede a place among the gods, free from age and death. The youth accepted, becoming the divine cupbearer who served nectar at the feast of the immortals. To comfort Ganymede's father, Zeus sent him magnificent gifts and promised that his son now lived in eternal honor. And to make the boy's beauty everlasting, Zeus placed him in the heavens as the constellation Aquarius, the water bearer, where he shines still. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a good reinterpretation or example of the Apollo and Hyacinthus myth, but I possess two volumes of a manga, Olympus, that shows relationship between Ganymede, Zeus, and Apollo in one story. However, it is not officially, of course, considered a BL manga. In actuality, Ganymede hears how people talk about the myth of beautiful Ganymede, who becomes a lover of Zeus, but he is shocked that people even think about it, because that's not true, technically speaking. This interpretation of the myth shows us a story of philosophical. This is a philosophical story of God and human thinking about the meaning of God's existence, the meaning of truth, of asking questions. Why do gods exist? What is the relationship between gods and humans? Do they actually know everything, or maybe not? Why is it that they also question the reality? Apollo is a very rude and not really nice, to say the least, god that very often laughs at humans' stupidity, and Ganymede serves him as a sort of entertainment. At the same time, as you can see over here, I'm not sure if you can see the arrow, but the guy on the bottom right is the Zeus In the myth, he turns into an eagle. In this manga, he has also features of a bird. And it's interesting how he almost never appears during this whole story, even though it is about him and Ganymede. But at the end of the manga, sorry for the spoilers, Ganymede finally accepting his fate and deciding to stay, you could say, makes Zeus smile, apparently. And this is also what Apollo is surprised about. The question was whether the mighty Zeus could be more human, and maybe he will soon find an answer. So for people who would love to see some romantic aspects, Olympus might not show them, but nevertheless, it leaves some room for interpretation. And now, yes, Achilles and Patroclus. They grew up together in the house of King Peleus, training under the centaur Chiron. Achilles was brilliant and fierce, Patroclus gentle and steady, and their bond grew into deep devotion that shaped both of their lives. When the Greeks sailed to Troy, Patroclus followed Achilles into war, but after Achilles withdrew from battle in anger, the Greek army began to falter. Wanting to save their comrades, Patroclus put on Achilles' armor and led the Myrmidons into the fight. He drove the Trojans back, but in his courage he pushed too far, and Hector struck him down beneath the city walls. Achilles' grief was overwhelming. He returned to battle with fury no one had seen before, and killed Hector to avenge Patroclus. When the funeral pyre was built, Achilles placed a lock of his own hair upon it and swore they would not be separated even in death. Later, when Achilles himself fell, their ashes were buried together, so their names would rest side by side for all time. And of course, this presentation would not be this presentation if I didn't mention the Song of Achilles. From the book itself, like the story of their childhood until Trojan War through the eyes of Patroclus, basically. The vast majority of this book is accurate to the original mythology as well, meaning that the readers can actually learn a little bit from it. Patroclus accidentally killing a boy, okay, yes, that was real. Achilles being sent to study, yes, happened. And of course, boys doing the do, yes, that was also true. And as you know now, not very weird for Greek culture. But what some people say is the quote-unquote issue with the book is how Patroclus was portrayed. Apparently, in the mythology, Patroclus was also born and bred fighter, just like Achilles. The only difference was that he was not a son of a god. And although the dynamic between Miller's Achilles and Patroclus was very lovely, her Patroclus was not the ancient Patroclus that we know. Because of the switch in character, the most crucial moment in the story when Patroclus convinces Achilles to let him put on the armor and go fight. In the Iliad, it's Nestor, he is the one who gives Patroclus this idea and buys some time. Achilles therefore agrees, but only because he knows that Patroclus is perfectly capable of handling such a role. Whereas Miller has Patroclus promise Achilles he will not fight at all. Homer has Patroclus promise Achilles that he will not take the Troy without him present. Very different character, just in that detail alone. And both Miller and Homer's Patroclus do promise not to fight Hector though, and both break the oath, as we know. China has, actually it's pretty funny or ironic, because the China we know filled with censorship, filled with arrests of authors of different danmei, filled with impossible to overcome sometimes rules of releasing a drama that is supposed to be gay and not gay at the same time, was actually quite open about male-to-male love in the past, in the ancient times. And it wasn't really that much different from the other cultures that we have talked about until now. Male-to-male love was present in literature, and in imperial courts among scholars. Ancient Chinese society judged this relationship primarily, like what mattered in ancient society of China, just much as of the others, was to fulfill the social role. So, okay, you could have a male lover, okay, you could have sex with a male lover, fine. But what mattered was that you had to get married and you had to have children to continue the lineage. It's not really that different from Egypt or Mesopotamian or Greek culture that we have discussed until now. Confucianism put strong emphasis on maintaining the family lineage, Neo-Confucianism as well. However, it was also more strict regarding the sexual acts, which were apparently more acceptable only within marriage and for procreation. Buddhism itself was also against sexual desire in itself. It didn't support it because it was not helpful in reaching the nirvana. But none of them specifically mentioned same-sex intimacy. And we all know Taoism, right? The fertile ground for all Danmei that we have read. Taoism was probably the most the most cool about having same-sex relationships. Some emperors in our stories, but in Taoism refers to martial arts as well. What matters in these relationships is that sexuality generally is like a part of natural flow of life. So we all have these yin and yang stories, changing energy, sharing energy, cultivation, and everything. This is because Taoism was the most like open about these kinds of relationships. And when it comes to the mythology/legends, China has actually quite a few examples. The Bitten Peach, the first one I'd like to talk about. In the state of Wei, long before the empire was unified, Duke Ling ruled from a court filled with scholars, musicians, and clever attendants. Among them was Mizixia, a young man admired for his beauty, wit, and kindness. The Duke favored him above all others, for Mizixia's presence brought lightness to the other, often heavy state affairs. One spring day, the two of them walked together through the palace gardens. Peach trees were in bloom, their branches heavy with fruit. Mizixia plucked a ripe peach, its fragrance sweet in the warm air. He took a bite, and the taste was so delicious that he smiled without thinking. Seeing this, Duke Ling asked what had made him so happy. Mizixia looked at the peach in his hand and then at the Duke beside him. Wanting to share the sweetness, he offered the fruit, already bitten, to the ruler. And Duke Ling accepted it gladly, touched that Mizixia would give him something he had enjoyed himself. To the Duke, the simple act meant more than any treasure. It showed trust, closeness, and love unburdened by formality. He spoke of it often, praising Mizixia's sincerity and affection. In later generations, people remember this moment as the bitten peach, a poetic symbol of love between men, cherished for its tenderness rather than grandeur. Yes, it's a very lovable story, a very cute one. And actually, I think this manga could be considered like a reinterpretation of this story, because it is a story about it is a manga drawn by a Japanese author, but it's about a Chinese emperor and his humble male peach maiden. Peeling the Sweet Peach is a manga that introduces an idea of a peach maiden, basically a being that is brought up only to serve an emperor, because whenever the ruler tastes them, they taste sweet. And Tori is one of those peach maidens who is actually not accepted well between his fellow maidens, because he is a man, and usually the peach maiden is a maiden, like the name suggests. And the boy really wants to prove to the emperor that he is a very good peach maiden. He wants to have sex with him and show him that he's the tastiest peach ever. But emperor, actually knowing him from some time ago, prefers him to be himself. He doesn't want Tori to become the peach maiden. He wants Tori to be Tori. And this is a very lovable story with some smut scenes that you may like. I definitely recommend checking it out. just as cute as the original one, you could say. And now the famous story of the cut sleeve. Probably most of the Danmei fan knows. No. In the Han Dynasty, Emperor Ai found rare comfort in the company of Dongxian, a gentle young court attendant whose presence eased the weight of ruling an empire. One warm afternoon, after speaking quietly together, they both drifted into sleep on the same couch. When the emperor awoke, he saw that Dongxian was still resting peacefully, his head lying on the emperor's long silk sleeve. Court officials were already awaiting, but Emperor Ai could not bring himself to wake the young man. Instead, he took a dagger, cut off the sleeve of his robe, and slipped away, so Dongxian would continue sleeping undisturbed. The torn sleeve became a symbol whispered throughout the palace, a sign of affection so deep that even an emperor would sacrifice his dignity for the comfort of the one he loved. From then on, people spoke of the cut sleeve as a poetic name for love between men. And, well, yes, poetic name for love between men, of course, but we all know how the main character of Mo Dao Zishi was called. It was actually an insult. It was supposed to be as an insult, yeah, but nonetheless, it sounds very poetic. Okay, I mean, you'd rather be called a cut sleeve than an F word, that's for sure. However, unfortunately, the example I have for you is not so nice. Okay, I'm not sure if any of you know this series. Sleeves Stained in Blood, available on Lezine. This is a manhwa. Again, this is not even a Chinese, it's a manhwa. And it's an adaptation of a novel. I haven't read the novel actually, but I have read the comic. And yes, technically speaking, cutting your sleeve should make you a simp. But this story is very dark, unfortunately. The scene of cutting a sleeve does happen in the comic. Yes, it does. So it is definitely a reference to the story. But unfortunately, it's filled with rape, okay? It's filled with rape, with cruelty. This emperor guy is not nice. And the story is about him and his general, their relationship they have. The general is in love with him, has been in love with him for a very long time, but he feels guilty about it because he cannot bear any children for the emperor, and he actually harms the empress later on. I mean, at the beginning of the series. But it doesn't matter to the emperor because the emperor actually loves the general and he wants to force the general to admit that he's in love with him. So throughout the whole comic, until now at least, we constantly see him raping him in different ways and humiliating in different ways possible, just so that the general could admit that he is in love with him. I mean, calling it a psychological manhwa would be an exaggeration. It's not a psychological manhwa, it's just, a comic that has a lot of cruel scenes between the characters that are supposed to love each other, but in the end they do so many cruel things between each other. It's just very, very tiring. But nevertheless, I mean, if you enjoy these kinds of elements, the court plays, the tension between the ruler and its followers, then I guess I can recommend it, yes. The next two examples I have for you. Oh, by the way, I've never studied Chinese, so I was really trying to get those names correct. Sorry for the pronunciation. Nevertheless, sorry for the pronunciation. The next two examples I have are actually from a little later than the time period I put at the beginning of the presentation, but nevertheless very interesting examples to share. There was actually a historically recorded person, a Chinese general, whose name, and sorry for the pronunciation, Han Zigao, who was considered to be officially a favorite lover of Emperor Wen. And basically he met the future emperor around the year 554 when he was only 16. and the future emperor was still a general. He was so impressed by the young man, he renamed him to Zigao and made him his attendant, and soon grew deeply attached to him. Zigao served with absolute devotion, guarding Chenxie, I don't know, Chenxie with a sword, tending to his food and drink and sensing his worries before they were even spoken. As he grew older, Zigao trained in riding and archery and quickly proved himself brave and capable. When Chen Xian trusted him completely, a bond reflected even in dream, when there was actually an episode when Zigao saved him from falling off a mountain, something that happened later in real life during a night attack. So when the Emperor Wen finally became the emperor, he elevated his favorite man to general, and Zigao's military successes made him one of the most respected commanders of the Chan dynasty. He was later recalled to the capital to guard the imperial palace, and when the emperor gravely fell ill, Zigao stayed at his side, administering medicine until the emperor's death. There is actually a movie adaptation, or at least an attempt of an adaptation of this story, Han Zigao, the Male Queen, and the title is a direct reference to this story. And okay, yes, I know some people may be excited about it, but hold your horses. It's not a good movie. Okay, it's not a good movie. Nowadays we have different media sources and very good quality series and films about BL and everything. But this film was created when such things didn't existed. It looks bad and it is quite bad, but it does tell the story, okay? And a little bit differently. As you may have heard during this description earlier, Zigao was actually a very skilled fighter and appreciated by the emperor. But in this story, I think he's quite of a pimp. Even though he's trained to practice, he's too feminine to actually carry the name Han Zigao from this recorded legend. And the ending is ridiculous as well. If I understood it correctly, he actually committed suicide to prove his loyalty in a way. It was so ridiculous. I couldn't watch it. I mean, I watched it because I was hungry for ancient Chinese BL drama when I was younger, okay? But in reality, it was very difficult to watch. And you all know this kind of reality, okay? It was guilty pleasure. But nevertheless, yes, this is an attempt to show an interpretation of this story. Legend I would like to focus on is the story of Tuoshen, the rabbit god. This is a very tragic story as well. A young man named Hu Tianbo fell ill in love with a handsome imperial inspector. His feelings were gentle and unspoken, but when he was caught watching the man from afar, the inspector reacted with anger. Hu Tianbo was executed for a love he never acted upon. When his spirit reached the underworld, the judges saw that his heart had been sincere and his death unjust. Moved by his compassion, they transferred him into Tuoshen, the rabbit god, a deity who understands the hopes and sorrows of those who love their own sex. Returned to the world as a guardian spirit, Tuoshen became someone people could pray to for companionship, understanding, and the chance to love without fear. Shrines rose later in Taiwan as well, where offerings of incense and sweet cakes were left for the gentle rabbit god who protects the hearts of lovers. In the story, the love is gentle and the rabbit god is gentle, but in a certain interpretation of Andrea Thomas Wang, a short 15-minute movie, this rabbit god is actually very sexual and tempting. When you watch this film, you feel as if he actually tries to somehow make the main character desire him. But when you take into consideration the role of Tuoshen and like in the mythology, The film can be easily understood as an interpretation of sexual awakening, you could say. The main character is actually allowed to finally be himself and see himself within the rabbit god. It's a very short film, available on the internet. It has a little bit of a surreal touch, but which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And last but not least for today's presentation, Japan, okay? Which turned out to be actually quite difficult. So, oh, is there some kind of problem? Can you see the presentation? Okay, yeah, it seems fine, thank you. The truth is, okay, homosexuality in Japan's past occupied a complex but often socially accepted space, especially before Western influence reshaped the attitudes, of course, in the 19th century. For much of Japanese history, same-sex relationships were neither criminalized nor heavily stigmatized, and they appeared in several cultural spheres. In Buddhist monasteries, relationships between monks and their younger acolytes were documented as part of established social structure. And among samurai, male-to-male bonds were sometimes idealized as expression of loyalty and mentorship. Urban culture in the Edo period also featured male actors in kabuki theater who attracted both male and female admirers. Although acceptance varied by class and context, the historical Japan generally treated same-sex intimacy as a natural part of life rather than moral transgression. And you can see many different manga about Edo period, okay? Many different manga that show as well the mythological creatures which can change gender, like Kitsune over here, Kyubi Kitsune, Hainayama. And however, the problem is that I wanted to focus on ancient times, like as similar as possible. And the truth is that usually manga focus on Edo, focus on the samurais and maybe the Meiji period, and the furthest they get is the Heian period, like those three over here at the top. But the time period I wanted to check out is the prehistoric Japan, Jomon, Yayoi, Kofun, and Yamato periods. And then it became a little bit more difficult to find any resources to show their attitudes exactly. Not much material, yes, unfortunately. This is the period that Japan didn't have probably much written records. However, what we can get from different resources, especially because Shinto was the main religion, was that sexuality was also part of natural life, not a moral category. And Shinto as a religion emphasized harmony with nature, so it didn't really regulate the desire. Gender roles were fluid in myth and shamanic practices, so there was no sign of taboo around same-sex intimacy, okay? Mythic traditions in Shinto also show different characters that, for example, change genders or cross-dress. So these kinds of sexual or gender-related topics were quite common in their religion, you could say. However, finding an example of a manga that could cover this was actually very difficult, okay? It was a challenge. So I found a manga that is a reinterpretation of a legendary character that was a woman. Princess Himiko, okay? Historically speaking, Princess Himiko was recorded not even by Japanese sources, but Chinese dynastic records. And she's known to be one of the earliest historically attested figures in Japan that are considered to be the rulers of unified Japan. And these accounts give surprisingly detailed picture that she was a shaman queen, she was unmarried, served by 1,000 female attendants, lived in a fortress-like palace, rarely appeared in public, and so on. But that's basically it. Generally speaking, historians believe that she may have been merged into or confused with legendary figures such as Empress Jingu, or Yamato Hime no Mikoto, some kind of priestess. But nevertheless, Tomo Serizawa decided to use this legend and put it in a BL. Okay, so in Scarlet Secret, Himiko is not one person. It says it's a role. It's a name of the ruler, and main character Shiki is a boy that is chosen to become Himiko. The story revolves around Shiki and Yamato, who are childhood friends. And when they are very young, Himiko appears in their tribe, in their village, and decides to take Shiki as the offering. And everyone thinks he is killed. Everyone thinks he burns in fire. But in actuality, he is taken by Himiko to this fortress, to this castle, and trained to become a proper shaman that hears the gods and has their power. He basically becomes something more than just human. He receives a special power, healing power. He can hear the oracles, and he doesn't have to eat. He doesn't have to sleep. However, the more he talks to Yamato, who later on, of course, when they are older, I mean, they meet each other, okay, and Yamato decides to serve Shiki, the more he spends time with him, the more he loves him, the more the gods are angered and want to take, like, Shiki comes to the point where he has to make a decision whether to stay a shaman and lead people fulfilling his duty, or basically being human and falling in love. So, conclusions. To summarize, what does all of this mean that we have just talked about? When we talk about gay or LGBTQ themes in ancient myths, we are using modern language to describe patterns of affection, desire, and gender expression that ancient cultures understood differently. Scholars note that ancient societies did not divide people into heterosexual or homosexual, the identities the way we do today, basically. Sexuality was often framed through status, role, age, social hierarchy, not necessarily the orientation. Love was also separate from marriage. That's also a significant difference to our times. Nevertheless, it shows that queer experiences have always been part of human culture. Ancient myths contain gods who change gender, heroes who love each other, and rituals that blur the boundaries of masculinity and femininity. So these stories matter today because they challenge the idea that queerness is new, it's Western. They show that across thousands of years and many civilizations, humans have imagined love and desire in diverse and creative way. And that's why the ancients were gay. Thank you for listening. That would be all I had for you today. Mic drop, exactly.
It was wonderful, Rotty. You did a great job. So we do have 6 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time to ask.
Jesus, I was so worried I wouldn't be able to make on time everything. I actually had to cut out some things on the go. I hope I wasn't speaking too fast. Sorry about that. And if you want to, I can put the slides in this additional Discord channel if you didn't manage to read them all. Thank you. If there aren't any questions, do you guys have your favorite myths about either gay or maybe you have some comic or books that are reinterpretation of myths?
Someone actually did anything notable from Mesoamerica.
Can you repeat, Noodle? I couldn't hear. You sound robotic to me for a bit.
Oh, sorry. No, Discord decided to restart for me mid-conversation.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Anything notable from Mesoamerica?
Is that a question to me?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Unfortunately, I didn't dive into this part, so I may not know any any examples of mythology from this area. I was focusing on the most iconic ones and the ones that I found examples in the BL media. So I can look into it and we can discuss this topic in the channel. But unfortunately, for now, since I haven't been specifically prepared for this topic, I don't have any examples for this presentation. Yes, there will be the discussion thread for the presentation. I haven't made it, but I will make it after the meeting. I think I will share the slides over there. And actually, I have some examples of other comics I wanted to show, but I couldn't in this presentation. On Webtoon, for example, there is this reinterpretation of Hades and what was her name? The girl that Hades took to his underworld. Persephone, yes. There is actually a webtoon that tries to show it as a gay story. So in the thread, we can share each other's favorite comics or examples of reinterpretations or inspired comics in there. So I will definitely make it, yes.
Helena asked, are there any other mythologies you're interested in aside from the ones you've presented?
I guess not really. Not really. This presentation was basically the biggest representation of mythology I was mostly interested in. And I did read about some episodes in Norway, like mythology. What do you call it? I forgot the name. Yes, Norse. Thank you. That was Nordic mythology. Thank you. I did read there are some examples, exactly Loki, especially being queer. But that's about it. I'm mostly interested in, obviously, Japanese culture and mythology, in Chinese, and I guess Greek and Egyptian. These are the most favorite ones.
Kelsey asked, what got you interested in this topic?
Gays, period. I mean, no, I mean, that's, I mean, yeah, yes and no, obviously. I guess I generally like talking about this to people because of how often people accuse, you could say, queer identities and queer community of inventing this queerness. But what I like to show them is that no, we just maybe invented the names, but and we focus on identity, but the male to male, woman to woman relationships were not really that uncommon. It's not an invention of modern times. The desire to have sex with the same gender has always been there, and that's one thing that made me interested in the mythology, but also in the history. But I guess mostly, yeah, gays. I mean, if you like BL, you like everything that is related to BL.
That is very true, and it looks like we are right at time. So if anyone has any more questions, go on, pop over to the discussion once it's created. And thank you so very much for the wonderful presentation, Rotty.
Thank you for coming. I hope you had fun, really. And I guess see you on the Ultimate BL quiz in a few hours. That's the time I get unhinged.
Well, I'm sure we all look forward to that. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.